Good afternoon. It is indeed my pleasure to welcome you to our 23rd webinar in the Coffee With webinar series sponsored by the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership at Seton Hall University. I'm Reggie Lewis, the center's executive director, and it's truly great to see all of you logged on from around the country to take part in our conversation with Alex Kor and Graham Honaker, authors of their new book, A Blessing, Not a Burden, My Parents' Remarkable Holocaust Story and My Fight to Keep Their Legacy Alive. The Coffee With series provides the center the chance to showcase the inspirational stories of servant leaders and the endless ways in which individuals, organizations, and society in general can be truly transformed by the power of servant leadership, a philosophy in which the leader first seeks to serve. In a few minutes, we will, of course, formally introduce our guests, who are no strangers to the center. But before we proceed, a quick word about the center. For nearly 60 years, the Greenleaf Center has worked to promote the awareness, understanding, and practice of servant leadership. In addition to the Coffee series, our other core programs include the annual Public Policy Lecture, which features thought leaders and issue experts from a range of sectors applying a servant leader's lens to a challenging policy topic. The Greenleaf Scholars, which funds researchers promoting the efficacy and impact of servant leadership. The center also exposes high school and college students to opportunities to develop lives of service through our Next Generation initiative. And through our outside engagements, we proudly work closely with organizational partners as they implement the practice of servant leadership throughout their workplace culture. And now the moment you've all been waiting for. It's an honor to introduce Dr. Alex Kor and Graham Honaker. Alex Kor is the son of Michael and Eva Kor, both survivors of the Holocaust. As a Terre Haute, Indiana native and a tennis-playing podiatrist. He's not just a podiatrist, but he's a tennis-playing podiatrist. Alex is a proud Butler University alumnus. He received his medical training from the Skoll College of Podiatric Medicine in Chicago, and he's currently affiliated with the Hendricks Regional Health Facility in Indiana, where he practices in orthopedics and sports medicine for the facility. He's a fellow and past president of the American Academy of Podiatric Sports Medicine and a fellow at the American Society of Podiatric Surgeons. He speaks on a variety of subjects, including ethics in medicine and his experiences, and of course, the experiences of his parents. Graham Honaker currently serves as the executive director of Principal Gifts at Butler University. He's also an active member of Toastmasters International, Project 44, whose mission is to save lives by fostering a willingness to support and join the Bone Marrow Registry, and the Indianapolis Kiwanis Club, where he has served as president. You should also know that Graham is our esteemed board chair for the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership. Before we begin the interview with Alex and Graham, we felt it important to provide our audience with a bit of context for those who may not be as familiar with Eva Moses Kor or this subject matter. Let's take a brief look at the video and we'll come back after.
Eva is the model of, you think you have it hard. Let me tell you a little story.
Eva Moses Kor, survivor, teacher, global inspiration, a Hoosier example for the world to follow.
We are free!
To have come as far as she has come, to have reached the stature that she has reached, is an extraordinary achievement.
Born in 1934 into an idyllic farming life in Romania,
and take some juicy cherries, looking at the sky.
Eva saw that life shatter when the Nazis occupied her village. Soon the Moses family, the only Jews in town, were carted off to Auschwitz, the deadliest of Nazi death camps. What Eva went through there at 10 years old is still hard to imagine.
There was everything in the world was done to me that would have killed me. And here I am alive.
After being separated from her parents and older sisters, never to see them again, Eva and her twin Miriam were used in experiments by Nazi Dr. Joseph Mengele in his efforts to create a perfect Aryan race.
Took lots of blood from here and lots of injections into here.
3,000 twins were experimented on in the Holocaust. Eva and Miriam were among only 200 who survived. Eva's self-liberation, however, was a long time coming. She eventually married and in 1960 moved to Terre Haute. There, Eva suffered tremendously, isolated by her confusion and rage about what had happened to her.
And most of my battles were alone. Nobody understood it.
Her anger was equaled by fierce determination. Single-handedly, Eva introduced the Mengele twins to the world, and she initiated the biggest manhunt in history.
The worldwide search for this war criminal was given new impetus today by those who were his victims.
Her ability to keep hearkening back from her little perch in Terre Haute, Indiana, was what woke up the world.
Eva's biggest accomplishment came from within.
I, Eva Moses Kor, hereby give amnesty to all Nazis who
In 1995, on the 50th anniversary of the Auschwitz liberation, Eva Moses Kor returned to the camp to announce that she had forgiven the Nazis.
Enough is enough. I am healed inside.
Since then, even amid debate over her decision, a one-time prisoner and long-time outcast flowered. Through her Candles Museum in Terre Haute, Eva dedicated her life to combating genocide, to spreading inclusiveness, to healing the wounded, and to planting seeds of self-empowerment and hope in a new generation.
She does not want you to leave the museum crying. She wants you to leave the museum smiling and empowered and ready to make a change in this world.
In her final years, Eva was followed and honored as never before.
The Grand Marshal of the 61st IPL 500 Festival Parade, please welcome Eva Kor.
She received Indiana's highest designation.
It is my deep honor to present my first Sachem Award to Eva Moses Kor.
And a new documentary and education program are taking her example and messages around the nation and beyond. She has more momentum now than she's had at any other time in her life. And so many times we are hearing people say, my gosh, that woman is incredible.
And you can change the world. Did you know that?
I want to be like her. I'm not an ordinary kid. I can change the world. I can do something special.
Eva Moses Kor, life force, teacher, inspiration. A woman who stood as the perfect example of the power a single person has to make the world better.
I don't know if the world will really remember me or not. But if I could help improve this troubled world, that's good enough for me.
Powerful, truly powerful. I want to be like Eva. Graham, Alex, you have your mugs. Are you ready? Okay, just make sure there's only coffee in there.
There is.
All right. Let's get started. And I just want to remind our friends who join us, please begin to use the Q&A feed to get your questions in. You're going to have an opportunity for the second half of our program to ask Graham and Alex questions about this wonderful book. But we'll begin with some sense of how we can better understand the connections. And both Alex and Graham are proud residents of the great state of Indiana. I think I'm supposed to refer to this as Hoosier country, something like that. But you guys have a few other things in common. So there's the Butler University connection, with Alex being among the esteemed alumni, and Graham, of course, being on the development team that helps to sustain the university. And then there's that Terre Haute connection, Alex's hometown. But Graham, as the chair of the organization whose namesake not only founded the modern movement of servant leadership, but also claimed Terre Haute as his hometown, Robert Greenleaf, of course. But these connections and links are not as apparent as one might think. So tell us, reveal, gentlemen, how did you two come to know each other?
So there's a long story there, but the long story short is, and Graham will tell a different story. I was living in Baltimore, and I get a letter from Butler University Development, and I literally came, and I probably shouldn't reveal this, but I thought, I'm not, I give a little money, but I'm probably, and then I realized that it was handwritten. So I didn't tear up the letter. I opened it up, and there's a guy named Graham Honaker that's coming to Baltimore and wants to take me out to dinner. So I picked the nicest restaurant in Baltimore. I had no idea, I was prepared to make a donation to Butler, maybe talk about how I could help pre-med students at Butler. And we get all the way through dinner, realize we have a lot in common, big sports fans. And I said, so I'm kind of confused here. We're almost done here. What's the reason that you invited me to dinner? And so then he basically says, well, I have some German ancestors on my wife's side, and I need to meet your parents. And I said, you're kidding. I said, just drive from Indianapolis to Terre Haute, you can meet them. But anyway, that's my side of the story. And then we developed a long friendship, but there's a little bit more to it, and Graham will tell you.
I'll just add briefly, because Alex isn't always accurate when he discusses these things, but we had briefly met the year before in DC at a little reception before a Butler basketball game, and he completely blew me off, which is probably the story of my fundraising career. But we reconnected the next year, and I think, Reggie, the neat thing, our friendship has developed in conjunction with the work that we've tried to do, primarily Alex, to honor his parents. The quick follow-up to that meeting in Baltimore is a few months later, Alex's mother, Eva, was named our honorary degree speaker that May. Then we built a scholarship, an endowed scholarship in her honor here. And then we worked, again, primarily with Ted Green was the producer, but the documentary on his mother's life and a lot of things in between, and now the book. But I think he's one of my best friends. I don't know if he would say that, but we've built a great friendship alongside trying to recognize his parents and memorialize them for their lives.
Excellent. And I think both Alex and I share some common thoughts around why one should beware of getting a handwritten note from Graham.
Still waiting on his donation, but
so two solid Butler Bulldogs and friends who bring great energy to the board here at the Greenleaf Center. If you both would just say a bit about why you think our agenda here aligns so well with your mom's, Alex, and why this work should be continued throughout the world.
Well, I think Robert K. Greenleaf, who we'll talk about, is from Terre Haute, and originally from Terre Haute, where I'm from. And I think the idea of servant leadership, the idea of empathy, compassion, being the leader who serves as an example, really epitomize not only my mother, but my father to a great extent. As I was telling you before we got on the air here, A couple years ago, a high school classmate of mine sent me a message, say, you know, your dad was a really good example of servant leadership. I said, my dad was a pharmacist. He worked in a retail chain, and apparently on a Sunday, the pharmacy was closed. And apparently, this friend of mine, high school classmate, grandparents needed some medication, couldn't wait till Monday, so he opened up the pharmacy and gave and sold him the prescription of drugs, prescription medication, I think for high blood pressure. But the point was, he went out of his way to do this, and I think really both my parents really epitomized what Robert K. Greenleaf did, and what obviously the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership does every day.
And I would just add, Reggie, and I love being a part of the center, as you know. It is a unique tie, the Terre Haute tie, to Robert Greenleaf and to the Kor family. Eva Kor was known for many, many things, an advocate for forgiveness, peace, but she was a servant leader.
Yes.
It would have been easy. Eva and Mickey Kor worked up until their last days. It would have been easy for them decades ago to remove themselves and try to deal with the pain from the Holocaust on their own. But Eva in particular, and Mickey's style was to be more in the background, she had great empathy for people. She wanted to help them with their own pain, their own struggles, talk to them about, she didn't force her forgiveness, but she, you know, she was giving almost 100 lectures up until the day she died annually. And just embodied to me what a servant leader was when she wasn't always recognized for that.
And I want to just jump in too, and I think it's important that for people of Terre Haute, Vigo County, Wabash Valley, that they understand that I think this connection is something that we should only strengthen moving forward.
Absolutely, and we will certainly be following up on that. I want to turn now and get more into the Kor Honaker collaboration. A blessing, not a burden. My parents' remarkable Holocaust story and my fight to keep their legacy alive. Alex, I want to start with you. Why this title, and what motivated you to want to tell this story through your eyes?
Well, my mom died 2019. My dad died a couple years later. And really, quite frankly, ever since my father passed away, and even his last few days, I told him I was going to tell his story. And, you know, for me, people know about my mom, didn't know about my father. And in a lot of ways, I think my dad's story is even more remarkable than my mother's. The reason for the title is, there are many reasons, but one of the reasons is that at times when I've lectured, or when I a lot of times was kind of hanging out with my mom when she was lecturing, there is somewhat of a knee-jerk response that sometimes second generation, me being a 2G son, there is a little bit of a stigma that maybe we have issues, or that there's post-traumatic stress disorder. Years ago, which is mentioned in the book, I went to a gathering of second generation in Colorado just to meet people. And I always thought that for me, it was always a positive, and maybe it was just the way I was raised. But all these people that were speaking in front of me about their experiences being second generation thought it was a major negative. Many had unfortunately tried to commit suicide. And so for me, it's always been a blessing. It's always been something like an extra perseverance that I have, that anytime something bad happens in my life, I can think to my parents. So that was kind of the reason for the title, Blessing, Not a Burden. And so I think it's very fitting. And then along, as far as what's happened in the world the last 4 or 5 months, I think it's even more important that the 2Gs, the second generation, third generation, fourth generation, don't think of it perhaps as a burden anymore. Think of it as a blessing, because unfortunately many of our parents, our Holocaust survivors, grandparents, are no longer here. So I think it's important that we try to tell their stories, if nothing else, so that maybe things like this in the future won't happen again.
Absolutely. And just, Graham, if you could speak to the collaboration from the standpoint as to what drew you to want to assist your friend in this endeavor to keep his parents' legacy alive.
Well, true story. Last summer we have dinner quite often, and we were having dinner, and he's long been talking about this book about his parents, and I basically said, "Look, you're either going to stop talking about it or we're going to do it." And in the back of my mind, he had talked to me about this before, and I was just thinking how fascinating the story would be. I knew a lot about Eva. I knew Mickey, but I really didn't know a lot about his dad. And I certainly didn't know what life was like walking in the shoes of Alex, which it's easier for me to say than him, was very difficult at times. And you'll read that in the book. And I'm a doer, Reggie. If I get my
Yes.
mind set to something, I do it. And the next day, I think I wrote up about 20 questions for Alex, and I sent him and I said, "Here's a little test. I want you to answer these questions for me, and let's just put together a concept chapter." And the snowball just started rolling. But yeah, and that's the process. And he and I are both really sick of each other at this point because we've been working nonstop for the last 5 months. But it was an honor for me, Reggie, just to be a small part of it, because it's his story and it's his parents' story. But I'm glad we're able to tell it, and we're excited about the completed project, nearly completed project.
Yeah, you're pretty much at the finish line, and it's a fascinating read. Both Gabby and I have been privileged to get to pour through the manuscript, and so I've been advised have to be careful here as we now move to our segment, which with some highlights from select chapters. And I will tell all the good people who joined us today that the Greenleaf team is not going to give it all away. We do want you to go out and get the book and absorb this rich story for yourselves. But we have pulled out a few highlights, and I'll begin by pulling something from an early chapter in the book. And Alex and Graham, I was struck by Alex, your mom's her early declaration around your aunt Miriam and I, her twin, we're going to survive. So she said early on that hope was in short supply. This was after her arrival at Auschwitz. And just for our audience, Eva Kor was only 10 years old, Eva and her sister. So these are babies. But she says early on, she declares that she and her twin would not meet their death at this concentration camp. And so I'm going to ask you both to reflect on that, because we're talking about not just an enormous sense of survival and agency for an individual, but this is agency from a 10-year-old. So whoever wants to jump in.
Yeah, so Reggie, my mom would tell you if she were here that when she arrived at Auschwitz, the cattle cars open. She was 10, but she immediately had to start thinking like an adult, because she knew right away, with the dogs barking, with the machine guns, with smelling death everywhere, that she could no longer be a 10-year-old. And on the first night after she was tattooed and put in the barracks with the other twins, on their way to the latrine being a hole in the ground, they saw the scattered corpses of two other girls. And my mom to herself said, "I'm going to do everything in my power to prevent Miriam and I, her twin, from being on the filthy ground with the scattered corpses." So I always ask my mom, "Did you tell Miriam, did you tell your sister that you had this plan?" She goes, "No, because I didn't want her to ask me, how is this going to happen?" She just kept on telling herself, "I must survive, I must survive." And the goal was just to live another day. They didn't know, they got there in May of 44. They didn't know when the war was going to end. Now, luckily, the war ended in January of 45. They were liberated January 27th. But every day, and there were challenges, which we talk about in the book, but the idea was to live another day, to make sure, and they had each other. They were all part of the Mengele experiments. There were 3,000 twins. Approximately 160 were liberated in January 27th, 45. But day in and day out, she had to think like an adult. She was no longer a child.
Reggie, I would just add, my hope is that this book is beneficial for audience looking for many different things in a book. History, of the Holocaust, how to forgive or advice on forgiveness, what it was like for, you know, a Jewish family growing up in a medium-sized Indiana town, which Alex and I love Indiana, but certainly has some, you know, dark history when it comes to race and anti-Semitism. But the other, if a reader out there is looking for a couple of heroes, they can be found in this book by the name of Eva and Mickey Kor. And that's one of the first shining examples of her courage. And there's many more of hers and Mickey's and Alex's. But you know, we all need heroes. Where can we find our real life heroes? And Eva and Mickey were my heroes from the start of my relationship with Alex. I tell this story. I have a lot of photos in my office at Butler, and about 13 months ago, a pipe burst above my office on Christmas Day, destroying all my books and files and most of my photos. But the photo of Eva and Mickey survived, which was very, you know, very poetically ironic that they were still there. But if you're looking for true courage from a 10-year-old, but really throughout their lives, I think you'll see remarkable examples in this book, and that's just one of them.
Thanks.
Remarkable examples of two solid heroes. But I gotta say, Alex, as I was listening to you a moment ago, and when you talked about the decisions your mom made just getting off that cattle car the first night, again, I was struck by her determination to live, but her feistiness when she, again, one thing I'll share with the audience, when she bites the soldiers who are trying to tattoo her, it's like, okay, it's on now. So and it was certainly on. It was a life well lived. I want to now shift to the post-liberation, and it's just again found in one of the earlier chapters in the book. It was a long road to normalcy and recovery for both your mom and your aunt. As your mom's story in particular unfolds in the book, it becomes clear that after Auschwitz, that this would be a difficult road to just finding one's way. I think one of the most poignant quotes for me was your mom's reactions to meeting her uncle in Israel after 5 years of struggling for really the basics, food, schooling, even emotional support and love. She says, we cried in his arms. It had been so long since my sister and I had received any real love from anyone besides each other. So I'm going to ask you both to reflect on how hard this must have been for, at that point when they were meeting their uncles, they were teenagers. So two teenage girls who were still completely ill-equipped to navigate this harsh world.
Yeah, I would even go back a couple of years earlier, right after liberation, Reggie. They were in an orphanage with nuns in Katowice, which is a town not far from Auschwitz. They had clean sheets, food, everything that a child would want. And the nuns gave them dolls. And my mom and my aunt said, we don't play with dolls. We're adults. They were 10, 11 years old. And really what they wanted were hugs and kisses, not the nice sheets. And then they ended up being taken in by an aunt, and they asked, could we have a hug? And oh, I don't give hugs. And so really, to your point, to your question, until they got to Israel, where they saw their uncle, it was really tough for them. I mean, can you imagine being 10, 11, 12, now a teenager, never seeing your parents again, and then having to deal with this world? You know, a lot of people wouldn't be able to navigate these waters. And yet once they got to Israel, they felt safe. They were in a kibbutz. And then, like you said, they were able to have the affection and compassion that they needed as teenagers to try to rebuild their lives.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about growing up fast. Did anyone ever grow up faster than these children around the Holocaust that survived, you know, without their parents being shuffled to displacement camp? You know, all 10, 11, 12-year-olds have already enough challenges that they're dealing with. They're changing, their bodies are changing. Then you add all this on top of it. Again, courage, perseverance, overcoming adversity, mental toughness. I mean,
Yes.
Eva Kor, I don't know if I've ever known of any more mentally tough than Eva Kor. And the last thing I'll add, and I may be expounding upon this, but maybe Alex can verify or tell me if I'm off. The Kor family ends up in Terre Haute, Indiana in the early 1960s, both Eva and Mickey. And why did they stay that long, right? And Eva's museum, why was it in Terre Haute, not Indianapolis? And I think, Alex, that town, the Terre Haute, showed her all this love and compassion that she really didn't have growing up because she was without family and a community. And Alex, I don't know if we've ever talked about that. Am I off on that?
No, and for some of those that don't know, my father, which we can talk about, was rescued by an American Lieutenant Colonel Neff, who allowed for my father to come to Terre Haute. But I mean, Terre Haute, when I was younger, you know, my mom was homesick, and there were times when we were thinking about moving somewhere where there was a bigger Jewish population, more diversity. But eventually, my parents became so ingrained in the culture in Terre Haute that, you know, my mom loved Terre Haute. I mean, years later, when she would fly across the country, she would fly, go to Los Angeles, and then come back that night so she could sleep in her own bed, and then the next day fly to Minnesota. So, you know, one thing going back to the teenage years in Israel, both my parents had a great sense of humor, and my mom was in a kibbutz. She was now 15, 16 years old. And as I asked her once, how was life in the kibbutz? She goes, well, I was a typical 15 to 16-year-old. And I was, you know, I liked boys. And she learned how to say, I loved you in 10 languages, because all the kids she was with were from Europe, were Holocaust survivors, all in the same boat, if you will, as her. And so she, you know, my mom and my dad had a great sense of humor, but that was her kind of response to my question.
We said she was keeping her options open, Reggie, by not many languages.
I there are many belly laughs for me throughout my reading of the book, and I would imagine that her sense of humor, her enormous sense of humor, was a part of her healing. I almost gave something away, but there's that moment where you all meet in the airport, and she gives you and your sister something, Alex, and I think I hollered at that point. So again,
Can I make a quick note on that,
yeah,
Reggie?
yes.
His parents had incredible senses of humor, which, if you think about it, if these individuals, who both of whom had lost more than 100 family members in the Holocaust,
right,
could find daily humor, we all should be able to. But
Yes.
we include, you know, when you look at the cover of the book, which is daunting, when you look at the cover of that book and the barbed wire, there are a lot of moments of levity in there, a lot of moments of humor, and they just had a great way. And I think that was a coping mechanism for them. But there are a lot of, I'm not going to give away any more, but really humorous anecdotes of how, again, I think they dealt with some of their pain with humor.
Absolutely. I want to turn now to what I'm framing as your mom's rationale for healing, by the way. And it's important for people to understand that she did find her way to inner peace and healing as outlined in the book. But she obviously carried, along with your dad, Mickey, Alex, the enormous emotional weight and toll from the experience. I mean, how could you not? How could you not? But there's a point in which she eventually realizes that the anger and the quest to bring the Nazi Dr. Joseph Mengele to justice was consuming her life. And in her process of dealing with all of this, she eventually learns the power of forgiveness. And I'll share this one quote. 50 years had passed since her release, but as my mother exited the Auschwitz grounds, she was liberated once more, this time from the anger and resentment that had crippled her for so many years. Forgiveness had set her free. Your thoughts on that, Alex and Graham?
Well, to this day, my mom's journey to forgiveness and her decision to forgive is questioned, is debated in many, many circles. And my mom's twin died in 1993, and through a strange series of circumstances, my mom met another Nazi doctor, and her thought was, in meeting with him in Germany at his home, was maybe she could help some of the other Mengele twins avoid the same predicament as losing a twin like she did. And so she went there with the idea that she was going to get information. He unfortunately said, look, I didn't work with Mengele. I worked separately. He actually helped save some 20-some Jews. His name was Dr. Hans Munch, which we can speak about. And so my mom then asked him a question about, did you see how the gas chambers worked? And he said, well, that's my nightmare. That's my problem. And my mom said, you have nightmares too? He said, of course. And so he went on to describe the operation of the gas chamber. And my mom said, for the world, this is important information. Would you, in over a year from now, come to Auschwitz with us for the 50th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz? And he said, yes. And so my mom came back to Terre Haute. She told me, and I said, I don't think this is a good idea. And she goes, well, I'm going to try to figure out a way to thank him. So my parents didn't drink a lot. My mom went to the liquor store. Nothing seemed appropriate. She went to the local Hallmark store. After 2 hours of looking for a card, nothing seemed appropriate. And then one day she thought, well, maybe I'll just write him a simple letter of forgiveness, thinking that this would be the highest honor she could give to him. So on January 27, 1995, he said his piece. He showed remorse. And then my mom surprised him and said, well, I forgive you. And she immediately felt that there was no longer this chip on her shoulder. She immediately felt more at peace. And this eventually led her to forgive Mengele. And so people to this day still are misinformed. And I think it's just important that my mom was on this path to try to heal herself. Her way of healing was through forgiveness. It's not for everyone. But I think for her, as I say in the book, it really allowed her to live a happy, last 20-some years of her life with no longer this chip on her shoulder. And I think it's something, even if you're not forgiving a Nazi doctor, if you're forgiving an old girlfriend or somebody in your family, my mom would tell you, when little kids are in 3rd and 4th grade, they learn reading, writing, and arithmetic. They should also learn the skill of forgiveness.
I would add, by the way, the Hallmark story, this was another little humorous line, was Eva saying, it's hard to find a Hallmark card for a former Nazi doctor. Those aren't easily found in the aisles. But this aspect of Eva's story made it relatable. When she was going out and lecturing prior to forgiveness, very few of us ever could even fathom what life was like as a 10-year-old at Auschwitz. But following her forgiveness, when she talked about the pain and the years of agonizing and suffering, which led to forgiveness, almost all of us can relate to somebody in our lives that we are trying to forgive. And that's what made this so unique. We did have, or I have had a little bit, another book on a Holocaust survivor. And, don't we have a lot of those? And first of all, I don't think we'll ever have enough of them, is my opinion. But Eva was such a unique figure in the survivor community. She is, to our knowledge, the first survivor to ever publicly forgive the Nazis. And that journey alone is just so unique. But it was also, you can read about it in the book, it was a very lonely journey.
Yeah.
She wasn't up there on the pulpit with 10 other survivors or 20 other survivors preaching forgiveness. It was Eva and Eva alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to build on your thought, your comment, Graham, about the reality that we all have at least somebody in our life who would be a candidate for forgiveness. And I know we're losing time, but I want to get into something called what we call her methodology of forgiveness. And Gabby will raise the screen. Your mom, Alex, was once asked, how do you do this? And in the classic Eva Moses Kor fashion, she tells us, Gabby.
So Eva says, the first thing you need to do is find a private room and grab a paper and pen. Pretend that the person that you want to forgive is in the room sitting across from you. Start thinking and writing. When I did this the first time with Mengele, I had to get a dictionary to look up curse words. When you are done, you do not need to keep that letter. Never ever give that letter to the person you are forgiving. It is for you and not that person. Forgive your worst enemy and it will set you free.
So whoever wants to, if, I guess it's fitting, Alex, for you to, if your mom were to offer additional guidance with respect to writing about the source of pain and anger when choosing to forgive, how might she expound upon that today, if at all?
Yeah, I think the one thing that is misunderstood is that she realized that not everybody had the capacity to forgive. She thought of forgiveness like chemotherapy for cancer. You don't take chemotherapy for your uncle has cancer, you take chemotherapy for yourself. And so she would say, look, you're going to do this for yourself. If you're not 100% at peace with this, then you can take back your pain. And I think, for many people, they've tried many different ways to heal. And in her eyes and her abilities, she was able to use the concept of forgiveness to heal herself. And there was a Mengele twin in Israel, lived in the same village as my aunt, that started to preach about forgiveness or talk about forgiveness. So, I think it is something that it's a learned skill, and I think all of us can benefit.
With your permission, so Graham, I'm going to shift to our last set of questions because I'm getting text messages from the audience saying you're hogging up the time, Reggie. Okay, but we can't in the first portion without talking a bit about a great place known as the Candles Museum, such an impactful organization, and it's important for the audience to know that this was Alex's mom's really her tribute to her twin sister, Mary. And it remains a huge part of her wonderful legacy to bear witness and to continue the necessary work to fight hate and prejudice. But so we don't leave out Mickey Kor, your dad. You do treat the reader to some great tales and insights about him, and he obviously was not as public. He did not prefer to be this public witness like your mom. But there's a moment when a tour guide of the museum is not available, and your dad decides to step up. And it feels to me like it's transformative. Not only does he step up, do the lecture, do the tour, but then we learn he does a piano performance. I'm wondering, was it That's Amore? Tell us about that, Alex.
Yeah, my dad loved to play the piano, and he liked Dean Martin. There was my mom was supposed to be there. My dad was filling in, and my dad didn't publicly talk about his experiences. There was a substitute teacher who also wrote a sports column in the local newspaper. He brought in some kids, and he said, "Oh, I thought Eve was going to be here." And my dad said, "Well, she's not available, but I'll give the tour." And he said, "Mike, I'm a survivor too." The gentleman had known my dad for several years, didn't know he was a survivor. So my dad gave his first story, and my dad, being a big Purdue fan, said, if the Nazis had got their way, there'd be one more open seat at Mackey Arena, because my dad was a season ticket holder for Purdue. But that was when he gave his first lecture and really opened up his own eyes to the fact that he could lecture, and he really felt good about himself. He would tell people, no, I don't talk about it. An hour and a half later, he was midstream and you couldn't get him to stop. So that was really, you are correct. That was the first time he gave a public lecture, and he actually lectured all the way. His last lecture was 2 weeks before the pandemic started in February of 2020, early February, to a group of students from Billings, Montana. So yeah, my dad's story, which we uncovered a lot of letters several years ago, I think the reader will be very interested to know a lot about my dad's life. And really, he eventually did forgive a Nazi as well, which I don't want to give that story away, but at the very end of his life, he did.
Yes. And if you both would, on our last question with respect to the work of Candles and the legacy of your mom, When you think about our polarization in our country, when you think about conflicts occurring all around the world, um, if she were with us, how would she advise us in using the servant leadership tools of forgiveness, healing, and building community?
Tough question, Reggie. Obviously, in this day and age, there's a lot of hate going around. I think the biggest thing that my mom would say right now would say, you need to respect your fellow human being. People say, well, you should tolerate people. My mom didn't want to be tolerated. She wanted to be respected for who she was, regardless of religion, regardless of race, regardless of upbringing, regardless of demographics, regardless of anything, that you need to respect your fellow human being. If we lose the idea of respect, that's when problems around the world start. And I think no matter what group you're talking about, you need to show empathy for your fellow human being. But I really think the key word is to respect each and every person.
Graham, thank you, Alex.
I can't add too much to that, Reggie. 2 days ago here in Indiana, Alex and I haven't had a chance to discuss this yet. We've had a lot of snow here recently. 2 days ago, just north of us, there was a large swastika carved out in the snow. And so we still have so much trouble with hate, discrimination. And at the end of the book, this was hard. We tried to drill down 8 principles from Eva and Mickey Kor that we hope everybody could apply. And again, if one person reads this book and does something, I'll give away one of them is, do something every day to make the world a better place. It sounds very, very simple. But if we just focused on that, I think my daughter might be listening on this call. I'm hoping she's listening to that. We need the Eva Kors. We need the Alex Kors. We need them more than ever right now. And we need their words.
Absolutely. Well, I wish we had more time, but we have to shift to the general Q&A portion. This has been a wonderful conversation. We'll find a way to get more of this into our webinar calendar before the year is out. But I'll ask the center's project manager, Gabby Cooper, to now lead us through the Q&A portion.
All right. Thank you, Reggie, and thank you, Alex and Graham, for being here with us today. The first question that we have comes from Charles, who says that he's traveled with Eva before to Auschwitz. And the question is, did Eva talk about how she wanted to differentiate candles from a typical Holocaust museum?
My mom, as Reggie said, the initial idea was to honor and memorialize my aunt, my mom's twin. And so one of the things, if you go to Candles Holocaust Museum, you're going to learn about my mom's story, my dad's story, and actually is another survivor from Terre Haute, Walter Summers, who recently passed away as well. But it is dedicated. It's the only museum dedicated to the Mengele twins in the world. And I think that was what set it apart. And to this day, I was just somewhere and somebody told me that I was talking to somebody on the phone from Tennessee, and they said, oh yeah, my grandmother was one of the Mengele twins. And I recognize the name because we have a list. And so it is the only museum dedicated to the Mengele twins. We actually also have, I'm a podiatrist. We have several doctors that are on the board of directors. So we've even started some bioethics. We had a bioethics webinar a couple weeks ago with actually one of the grandchildren of a Mengele twin who's a doctor in Israel. So we're trying to create a niche there. But yes, the one little niche would be that we're Candles is the only Holocaust museum in the world dedicated to the Mengele twins.
Real quickly, the other unique aspect is that this museum is in Terre Haute, Indiana. When you go to a list of Holocaust museums in the United States, New York, Miami, DC, Los Angeles, and then you see this blip, Terre Haute, Indiana. You go back to the courage and guts of that. We have a bit of history of Indiana's ignominious history on race that leads off one of the chapters. Here is Eva Kor, who says, I'm going to build a museum on the Holocaust in somewhat rural Indiana. Terre Haute's a medium-sized town, but you talk about guts, but that's one of the things that also differentiates it, is that it's in an area of the country that you might not expect to find a Holocaust museum.
And remind me again, the candle stands for something. It was in the book. I had it written down somewhere, and I
Children of Auschwitz Nazi deadly lab experiment survivors.
Wow.
My mom and I, she asked my opinion. I was kind of her sounding board. And so we had a variety of other ideas, but that was what was decided upon. And that's what has moved forward ever since the organization was formed in the 80s.
Wow, thank you. And then one last quick question for the both of you. Have you used the same model of forgiveness that Eva has used, or have you developed your own model?
Yeah, that's always a question. So, you know, I think I've never been one to hold a grudge against somebody. And this thought, I think, was how I was raised. And obviously how I was raised was my mom was one of the people that raised me. But one of the things that kind of dovetails on this, when I was younger, before forgiveness became something my mom talked about, I was in a car with a bunch of Jewish basketball players. We were all 10 to 12 years old. And one of the kids said, well, you know, we were talking about when we were going to buy a car. One of the kids said, well, Alex, you're probably not going to buy a German car. And I said, why wouldn't I want to buy a German car? If that's the best car, I'll buy the best product. And so none of the kids in the car could understand why me, being the child of 2 Holocaust survivors, would even consider buying a German car. And I said, look, if I learned one thing from being a child of Holocaust survivors, was not to prejudge somebody or some company or something based upon their nationality, race, creed, color. So that was years before, but I think for me, I've always remembered that story. And for me, I think, yes, forgiveness plays a role. I think I'm a very forgiving person. And so what my mom decided to do, her journey, I think definitely is something I feel strongly about.
I would only say it changed my paradigm of what I thought forgiveness was. I always thought forgiveness, I was helping out the person that I was angry at, and I wasn't going to take out my wrath on them anymore, you know, that type of thing. And, you know, there's a person in my own life who Eva really challenged and convinced me to forgive. And it still sticks with me to this day. And I highly encourage anybody to watch her lectures on forgiveness. But I do think she said she had a prescription for it, but it's your own individual path. It's your own individual path, and that's the one that she took.
And Gabby, I would also say that a lot of people think that forgiveness means forgetting. My mom can never forget. My dad can never forget. I can't forget. But yes, if you're doing something to help a fellow person and then indirectly you're giving yourself a gift, I think it is something we all should kind of utilize in our own lives.
Of course. Yeah. Well, thank you both so much for being here with us today. We have some brief announcements that I'm going to pull up before we go. Okay. So while we were limiting our time to this conversation today, we're so fortunate that there are opportunities to keep the conversation going, as well as take advantage of ways to continue learning about this history. This summer, Alex and Graham, along with the Candles Museum, are sponsoring a trip to Alex's father's hometown, or his birthplace of Riga, Latvia. There's still a few spots left. You don't want to miss this opportunity, so you can register online at candlesmuseum.org. Here at the center, there are still a few seats left in our Foundations of Servant Leadership course that starts tomorrow evening. You can use the QR code on the screen or visit greenleaf.org for more information and registration. As of this week, the Greenleaf Scholars application portal is now open for researchers promoting the efficacy and impact of servant leadership. So please visit greenleaf.org for more information and to see if you qualify for this Research Scholars program. If you would like to stay connected with the Greenleaf Center, please use the QR codes on the screen to see what the center has to offer. We will soon be announcing our Women's History Month speaker. And lastly, thank you all who joined today. If you could please take a moment to take the brief survey that comes after the Zoom call, we would greatly appreciate it. And Alex, I see you wanted to say something.
I just want to thank you, Gabby, and Reggie, and the entire Robert K. Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership for allowing me and Graham this opportunity. It really means a lot. And yes, feel free to contact Candles, holocaustmuseum.org, or contact me about any of the things we mentioned, and especially the trip to Riga, Latvia this summer. So thank you again, Reggie and Gabby.
Well, we thank you. We thank you and Graham for what you do every day. And it was really our privilege to be able to use our platform to spread the word about this incredible story. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you to all who joined us today. Until next time, bye-bye.
Thank you.